Welcome, everyone, on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the museum. And we're pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's program, Collecting and Preserving Traumatic Histories, Archivists in Conversation. This program focuses on our museum and the upcoming Armenian American Museum and Cultural Center of California, which is set to open in 2027 in the city of Glendale. And our discussion is with Harris Bauer, Collections Fellow at Holocaust Museum LA, and Ara Oshagan, the Consulting Director of Exhibitions at the Armenian American Museum. Today, we will reflect on how cultural institutions care for and manage materials connected to the histories of genocide, trauma, and cultural erasure. Each museum holds collections rooted in distinct communities and narratives, but they share common challenges in preserving and interpreting these powerful and often painful artifacts. Before we begin, I'm just going to briefly introduce our speakers. Harris Bauer is a writer, researcher, and archivist based in Los Angeles. She's, as I mentioned, the Collections Fellow at Holocaust Museum LA, where she works on archival processing as well as oral history recording and cataloging standards. She graduated from New York University and Long Island University's dual degree program in 2024, where she received an MA in Archives and Public History and an MLIS in Library and Informational Science. Her writing has been published by Wendy's Subway, Los Angeles Contemporary Archive, Metropolitan Archivist, and Bridging Fields. Ara Oshagan is a diasporic transdisciplinary artist and curator whose practice explores collective and personal histories of dispossession, legacies of violence, identity, and unimagined futures. He is a descendant of survivors of the Armenian genocide of 1915 who were deracinated from their indigenous homeland of Western Armenia. He was born in diaspora and was himself displaced due to war as a youth. He works in photography, archives, collage installation, film, books, art, public art, and monuments, and has published 4 books on photography, and is the artist in residence at the 18th Street Art Center at Santa Monica and curator at the City of Glendale Reflect Space Gallery. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And we will be having this discussion together. So begin by asking a few questions. So if if Ara, you can please begin by just briefly describing the history of your institution.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that Holocaust Museum of LA has invited us to partake in this discussion. I have to say, into my bio, I'm not an archivist myself, but what has been very interesting for us as we're building this museum is we're all learning in different ways, different things. And so I'm in this trajectory of learning how to deal with collections, what is archive, actual physical archive and institution. The idea of our institution, the idea of the American Armenian Museum began actually in 2013. It's been a while that it's been in the making, and it's really a community-based organization. The stakeholders, it's not like one person who invested a lot of money into creating an institution, but it's really community based. All the 4 Armenian churches are represented. Armenian political parties are represented. A number of important Armenian cultural institutions, organizations are also represented on the board of trustees. And then there's a very large community-based volunteer board of governors who are kind of moving the whole project forward. It was the impetus really was 2015 was the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, and I think the community really came together at that point. There was a number of different things that happened in the community, and one of the things was this idea that we need a cultural art center. It's a museum. It's a museum as well as a cultural center. And in that way, it's really the way I look at it. And it's got many different voices as part of it, and I really see it as kind of a diasporic space where we will be able to present um, elevate Armenian artists, present Armenian history and past, present, future, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, and also be a place. This is one of the goals, one of the kind of the visions of our institution is to be a place where we can create dialogue with different cultures, with different communities, with other communities that have similar kind of narratives as us in terms of history of displacement and diaspora and experience of extreme violence and genocide and Holocaust and these things. So it's one of the things that I'm very pleased to be able to be in this kind of dialogue with the Holocaust Museum, because it's one of the other things that we are trying to build in our institution. Uh, we plan to open sometime in 2027, and hopefully, I might, if I could say really quickly, my role there is more as I'm a curator, and my role is to create an idea, a kind of a exhibition plan for the next 5 years. But I'm also very deeply involved in the collections, and this is what I was saying earlier. I'm learning about collections. I'm learning what an archive is, how an archivist is, what a conservator is, and so it's a process of learning for us as a community and as a group of culture and art lovers.
Thank you so much. And Harris, can you please share with us a brief history of Holocaust Museum LA?
Yeah. Thank you, Ara. So, for sharing as well. And I think maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but as we were saying just before the webinar started, I think it's really so generative to think about what it means to kind of be part of a community building effort for a museum from the inside of that community versus, you know, thinking of like more scientifically trained, what does it mean to be educated in these fields? So maybe for later in the conversation. But Holocaust Museum LA, also a community founded museum. It was founded by a group of Holocaust survivors in the 1960s who had settled in LA and came together as a result of their shared history as Jewish individuals who had been persecuted by the Nazis and German Reich. And they all had a shared commitment to educating about what they and their families had experienced, as well as educating about kind of their cultures and communities prior to the war. The museum has been in its permanent home, which is in Pan Pacific Park, since 2010. But prior to this, had been located within the Jewish Federation building and had kind of moved around quite a bit for the 35 years or so prior to the completion of that building, which we're now in and actually in the middle of a expansion project as we speak, which will open next summer. But the museum's mission has always been grounded in education. So the collection was formed around these founding survivors' personal materials, things that they had in their possession that they then donated to kind of create this grassroots community-based essential archive that started the museum's collection. But today we have about 20,000 objects in our collection, which include official documents, newspapers, uniforms, other textiles, correspondences, a small art collection, and an oral history collection that includes testimony tapes from as early as 1982 that the museum undertook as part of their first exhibition that they developed in one of their earliest kind of ground floor spaces. And the vast majority of the collection, I'll also say, is related to personal donations. So beginning with this initial founding survivors group of personally sentimental materials that they had donated to the museum, we now hold most of our collection to be family collections, things that have been donated by survivors and their families. But we also have materials that have been donated by liberators or veterans from World War II who settled in Los Angeles and the surrounding areas, as well as other collectors that have kind of gone about collecting different types of historical documents over time.
Thank you so much. And both of you are actually grandchildren of genocide survivors. And so I would be curious if you could both please share a little bit about your family backgrounds and your connection to this history of genocide and cultural erasure. And Ara, you can begin. Thank you.
Yes, and before I get into that, I should add, which is I should have added at the beginning. We as a museum, we don't have a collection yet, right? So we are planning on having a collection, and we will at some point clearly bring in professionals who are trained in the field of collection management and conservation and all these things. But at this point, we are trying to just learn what are the what are the needs of a museum, and we've talked with a lot of different institutions trying to figure that out. So we are nascent. We have a nascent collection that is not we haven't taken any actual objects yet, but that's the plan very soon. Yeah. So my grandfather's grandmother's generation was actually from Western Armenia, which is present day Turkey. The Armenian genocide in 1915 displaced my families. My mother's family ended up going through. So it's all the displacement that happened from Turkey, from that area of Western Armenia. A lot of the communities, a lot of the families ended up in different countries in the Middle East: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran. My mother actually was born in Iraq, and then she came to Beirut to study, because at the time in the 50s, 60s, Beirut was the hub of the Middle East for those communities. And on my father's side, my grandfather was actually was not born in the Western Armenian highlands, the indigenous land, but he was born further west near Istanbul, and then he was actually in Istanbul during the genocide. He was one of the intellectuals who was targeted, but he was able to escape many times. He was an author and a teacher, and then when he left the Ottoman Empire, that region, he ended up in Bulgaria, and because my mother's family went east, he went west, ended up in Bulgaria because there was a big Armenian community in Bulgaria, and he met my grandmother in Bulgaria. And actually, my father was born in Bulgaria, and then my father bounced around different countries, went to school in France. He was also an author, ended up in Beirut, and met my mom there, and so I was born in Beirut. My brother and I were born in Beirut. As probably most of you know, in 1975 civil war in Beirut displaced many communities, including my family. So we were displaced to the United States, and to me, it's not only it's a communal, familial displacement, but also a personal one, because my family kind of fell apart when we were displaced. My parents divorced, and it was kind of an important marker in my life in terms of my trajectory. And it's our current day, the vast majority of our current day diaspora, even though you could say, there's been a diaspora, Armenian diaspora, for about 1,000 years, since 1046, when one of the the biggest Armenian cities fell. Armenians have been scattered, but the majority of the Armenian diaspora was created post-genocide, post-1915. So any kind of reflection or consideration of Armenian life community must take the genocide and the aftermath of genocide into consideration, and is very much part of who we are, as part of our identity in a way, in terms of how we look at our trajectory and how we ended up in different places. And what's also in the sort of a multiplex in our case is that we have multiple displacements. So it was not only my grandfather's generation displaced, but my generation was also displaced, as well as number of other communities displaced from the Middle East. And the Syrian Armenians were displaced about a decade ago, 15 years ago. And Iranian Armenian communities were displaced, huge Armenian community in Iran. They were displaced by the fall of the Shah in 1980. So it's the last 100 years has been, kind of this displacement after displacement for our communities, and so it's part of our important part of our history.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Harris, if you could please share a little bit about your background as a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, so as Michael mentioned in my bio, I received my MA in Archives and Public History. I graduated at the end of last year, and kind of I think it's relevant to bring up just because for me, I entered into this field really with a rooted interest in archives and research that questioned the relationship between memory and archival records. Because of my relationship with my grandmother. So it's really kind of all braided in for me as a human. um, my grandmother's her name is Mary Bauer. She's a 98-year-old Jewish Hungarian survivor of Auschwitz. She's a frequent speaker and longtime volunteer at this museum, at the Holocaust Museum LA, and has been, yeah, for several years, and has spoken quite frequently throughout Los Angeles since the 80s. So although also I should say that I've been working at the museum in an official capacity for a couple years. I've been aware of the museum since childhood. Um, and my grandmother's a really kind of giant presence. There might be people on this call that know her. She's a huge personality and quite a gift for telling long and meandering stories. So I say all this because she has a very prominent public presence. But she's also this very meticulous, organized person. She's lived in the same West Hollywood apartment since 1973, and is kind of this archivist in her own right. She's someone who's kept her own personal history, which includes her experience as a Holocaust survivor, but also her experience as an immigrant and as a refugee, as a woman, as a single mother, as a divorcee. So all these things kind of combine in how I think of myself as the grandchild of this woman who is a Holocaust survivor, but she's also so many kind of other identifiers. Um, and the way that she's organized her life, her private life, in relationship to her public facing life as a Holocaust survivor, is kind of the defining factor of how I've come to develop my perspective, but also kind of my work as an archivist. Um, I will share that, one of the things that introduced me to an interest in archives in general is that I was really frustrated by kind of that negotiation, and something that I really struggled with. These attempts at understanding how she was represented in public spaces and institutions through her testimony, for instance, and then also kind of negotiating the ways that I had a very complicated perception of her life beyond those records. She's very kind of figuring out this difference between the glossy, contained persona, and then this person who's much, and I say this with love and adoration, like a much messier kind of real person, whose life really expands beyond the event of the Holocaust, as all of our lives do. So that is sort of the defining, yes, aspect of how I think of myself as a grandchild, and my role as a grandchild in the museum. Yeah.
Thank you.
One of the things that's also a driver for us, for the how it's become part of our fabric, is that because the Turkey still denies that the Armenian genocide happened.
Right.
Sure, your audience knows about that, and so that's also one of the motivators in preserving and creating, um, and and becoming, recreating ourselves like a kind of a phoenix, post-genocide. Um, and I think that's like, we have, I think there are many parallel experiences between our narratives, but that's one thing that's kind of
Yeah,
different between our stories.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a perfect segue to this next question for you, Ara. What is the role of the Armenian genocide in your museum? Or what will the role of the Armenian genocide be in your museum once?
Yeah, and as I said, it's then genocide is such a defining moment for multiple generations for us. But our museum is not a genocide museum. This is one of the first things that has been that's one of our mantras in a way that yes, the genocide is very important, but we are not a genocide museum. We are a museum that's going to present the Armenian history. We have a 4,000 or so years of history. Then there's been like a challenge to really try to present all of that in a limited kind of space. Uh, I mean, are we going to be able to show some of those slides, Michael? I mean, maybe this
Yes.
will be
So
the
let me,
time.
yes. So I'm going to share the slides right now for you. So you will get a walkthrough of your museum.
Yeah, and so what I think I can do is go through a little bit to describe some of the things that the core exhibition is going to address. So the first few here are the renderings of the museum. This is a rendering. This is, if you've ever been to Glendale, this is Colorado Boulevard, I believe, and this is the kind of space it'll be. Um, and it's actually right now that's being built. The facade is being put up right now, and this is the back side of the museum, and on the left side there's going to be the Glendale Public Libraries on the left side, Glendale Central Library, and this will be this kind of space between the two. This is kind of what the atrium is going to be, and this tessellated the ceiling here is based on traditional Armenian rooftops in Western Armenian highlands and Eastern Armenia. And so this is the kind of the floor plan. So the museum is going to have upstairs, in the second floor, is going to have a core exhibition area, which is going to be this area, and there's going to be and then the other side there's going to be two galleries for contemporary changing exhibitions. And these are the 10 different zones that we're going to address. And we can step through these quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on them. Michael, if you want to go to the next one. So this is the entrance zone, zone one. As you walk in, you will be able to see this panorama of some video art. And this is I should say, it's preliminary and renderings of our design firm and sort of highlighting certain artifacts. And then you go to zone two. And this is looking at different cultural artifacts, different cultural things in Armenian across the whole range. And the idea here is not to be chronological, that is not start the exhibition from day zero and then go to today, but be a little bit nonlinear. In this case, different types of cultural artifacts, different types of cultural presence is going to be part of this from the very, very past, from 3,000 years ago, as well as from today. And then the next section is going to be Armenian. These are the epic theaters, so that the mythologies and different stories about Armenian architecture and historical events and mythologies are going to be in this space. And then the next one, this area kind of sets up where Armenians were pre-genocide, and which then kind of leads you to the next section, which is the genocide section. So this is going to be, obviously, it's going to be an important part of the museum. And here there's two different ways you can approach it. You can go sort of the way in which there's a little more graphic, a little bit more and more disturbing images. You have an option of looking at that or from the front. side of it. And then you loop around for the next space. It's this. So this is this called this bridge behind the big media facade that was that was in zone one. Here it's more about stories and sort of bridging from the genocide to diasporic spaces and post-genocide. So if you go to the next space, and this is a space that's going to address the different Armenian diasporas, first wave, second wave. It's a very complicated kind of movement that Armenians have experienced after the genocide, moving across different countries all over the world. And you go to the next slide. And also republics in Armenia. There were several republics. There was one immediately after the First World War, and then there was a Soviet Republic for a number of decades, and now there's an independent Armenia, as well as the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, which sadly no longer exists. So it'll address these republics happening on the homeland. And then you go to the next slide. And this is a slide about American Armenians. So this kind of focuses down in history in LA and Fresno and Boston, different Armenians who have impacted culture, life and culture here. And then if you go to the next one, and this will be kind of the last zone, which is looking at the future communities. And it's envisioned that it's going to be much more about people today and speaking oral histories, ideas, and possible futures. So I think that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So the genocide, yeah, is an important part of it. But you know, our museum's approach is a little bit broader. And it's yeah, maybe I'll stop there if we can come back to other ideas.
Thank you so much for sharing these wonderful renderings. I think this gives us a really good sense of the specific narrative that your museum will be presenting. And Harris, if you could please highlight an artifact that stands out to you personally from Holocaust Museum LA's collection.
Sure. So I'll speak a little bit just to elaborate on what Ara was saying. Our museum is a bit different because we're, of course, a museum that's focused on the event of the Holocaust. We're focused on that, this a relatively specific time frame, but we also our curatorial and educational philosophy as a museum is to think about and to represent what existed previously. So thinking about Jewish culture and community in it prior to 1933, but also far before that, in order to understand what was lost. So the museum teaches about the Holocaust through the lens of kind of what was there before, the world that we have a permanent exhibition that starts with the world that was and focuses on teaching about Jewish culture and communities in Germany and throughout Eastern Europe prior to 1939, or Hitler's rise to power in 1933. But I think I also just wanted to give a little bit of background in touching on what I think is really important to think about the basic function of an archive in this case, or archives are comprised most often of records and documents that record the actions of people, of people, places, organizations, and because of this, they're also quite often they are the collateral that's left behind, and they represent entire individuals in some cases. So, we can think about this from a legal perspective and how things are used as evidence, but also, thinking about the comparison between evidentiary records that are often created by systems of power and in this case, systems of oppression. So, administrative and bureaucratic departments in Germany that create records that can show the disenfranchisement of Jewish communities and through the events of the Holocaust. The museum values these materials that do show the actual actions, but there's also And I think this goes right back to the beginning, as I was saying, for the mission statement of the museum, um, this real value in the subjective and the idea that individuals are, as narrators in oral history and testimony, and through sharing stories, um, can really become are treated as experts because they are experts of their personal experiences, but are also firsthand witnesses that can speak for themselves, you know, in ways that documents cannot speak on behalf of the people that are represented in those materials. Um, so I just wanted to put that out there because I think that our collection in general sort of toes that line between really valuing the evidence of these materials, things that did happen, and I think this does speak a little bit to the complications of political denial, which I know is very much relevant for your museum and what's going on as you think about curatorial decisions. But yeah, I think this is something that's been fascinating for me because I'm, as collections fellow, working right now with a particular donation. It's a large collection called the Snyder Collection. It's composed of about 1,200 historical documents. And it's really different collection for us. We, in general, are a museum that, as I said, has mostly family materials, personal documents. But this is a collection entirely comprised of historical records and primarily bureaucratic administrative documents that have been purchased from auction houses over time. So they have really no connection to the individuals or their stories or their fates. We don't have that information. So what I've been working with is kind of describing these records, processing this collection, but also really trying to read against the grain and establish an understanding of each artifact that highlights the people who are represented within these records, as a way for us to think about what's actually being shown or discussed or kind of alluded to in some of these kind of obtuse documents. And I can speak, I mean, I can show a couple of these artifacts. I did send Michael a couple examples. Um, but it's just, I think that or do you want to put those up, Michael? If it makes sense
Yes,
for now?
so I
Yeah,
will, yes.
I can just show while we're talking about the artifacts. Um, maybe the green document. Yeah. Um, so this is just as an example. So this is from the Snyder Collection. It's a document from the Winter Relief Agency for German citizens. It's an allocation certificate. It's filled out by a 13-year-old boy who's named Wolfgang Bernheim. And it notes that he's received a jacket and knee breeches, but the handwritten notes underneath, which are quite difficult to read, are also, they note that he didn't provide proof of Aryan ancestry when he came to receive the welfare support, and he also came alone because his mother was sick, and he doesn't know if he's Jewish, is the last um, note there. And to me, I highlight this because I'm someone who's, as coming from a background where all I've ever received is oral memory, oral history from my grandmother. I work really closely with her in speaking about her experiences, and working with documents like this that are just so there's something almost mundane about it in some ways, but it also, I think, provides this incredibly human aspect. I was really visually affected by the signature at the bottom. This is very clearly to me a child's signature. I think you really receive this person's age in the looping script. And these are the kinds of materials that we only have them as stand-ins for the individuals that they represent. We don't have any voice or memory to kind of combine or pair with this kind of thing. So it's been a really different experience, and something that's been quite overwhelming for various reasons. And then I can also point out another artifact that I think
But
is
also,
very,
Harris, right? So, these
yeah,
documents have their own kind of agency, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Right, even though the person and the voice and all of that is lost, but there's some of that, uh, you, you know, embedded or part of this document itself, right?
Completely. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that makes the descriptive process so kind of important is ways that we can highlight and show what we're looking at, but also really like point out the person's name, the person's kind of placement in this document. Because I completely agree with you. I mean, I think these are the problem that arises, and this is something that I think we are not unique. This is an issue of archives in general for all institutions, is to find that line between the validation of the human being and then acknowledging the system that it's kind of held within when we look at the document itself. You know, who created the document? This is not created
Mhm.
by someone within the community. This is created by someone, this is a perpetrator document. You know, this is an administrative document, and it's kind of finding that balance. And it is a natural contrast to the kinds of sentimental materials that uh, I'm familiar with, but also that the museum holds in its family collections, right? Like these are not often material that's being donated that was already like this is not something that would be in someone's possession because these are materials that actually show for the most part just destroyed communities um and the destruction of these individuals that they represent.
Right. Mhm.
Thank you so much. Harris, did you want to share another artifact?
Um we if we have time we can talk about it later, but maybe we can move into, you know, other parts of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So a question for Ara, and you showed us this wonderful overview of the museum. Is there a feature in this exhibit that, or maybe an artifact you have in mind that you think best contributes to telling the story of Armenian Americans?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question, Michael. I was thinking about this question. One artifact or a set of artifacts, I don't know if I've had kind of a hard time coming up with that kind of object that would represent. I mean, we have dealt with all kinds of objects. I mean, um, one of the few things that did survive, for instance, the genocide, they became survivor objects, were a lot of photographs. Not a lot, So one of the few things that did survive are photographs, and those are the collections that we have. The few that we have really tell kind of a story, um, post genocide. Um, the thing that would I would consider, in terms of representing um, American Armenian story, for instance, is kind of a diasporic story also. The diasporic story that we are Armenian, but also we are American. We're also Lebanese. We're also Iraqi. We're multiple cultures that come together. So even though we say American Armenian, I kind of feel 100% American, 100% Armenian, and I was born in Lebanon, and so I have this deep connection to Lebanon. So I'm also Lebanese, and all these 100% equal 100% actually, if you believe my math on that. And so that kind of diasporic existence is part of our museum because there's so many different factions, so many different, not factions, but so many different communities from different cultural backgrounds that contribute to our community here in Los Angeles. As I was saying earlier, all these movements post genocide from Lebanon and Syria, and also in Iran, and also Armenia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Thousands and thousands of Armenians um, fled the Soviet Union and settled in Los Angeles. So they're also part of the fabric of the community. And so it's a very um, diverse, internally diverse, even though maybe from the outside, this is what I get this all the time from the outside. Oh, Armenians, you guys all look so sort of interconnected and in uniform, but really it's a very, very diverse kind of community. And the museum is kind of mission. The mission is to be able to represent all these different factions, not factions, I keep saying that, these communities, different cultural, Armenian cultural communities from different places, but also broadly Los Angeles cultural communities with this kind of creating this kind of dialogue that we want to create.
Can I ask, have you found that, and I think you mentioned this a bit when you were going through the museum, what will be held in the collection, but are you finding that what the kinds of materials or objects that do sort of find their place are often artistic representations or creative representations of what the experience um, feels like, or kind of represents a more creative impulse rather than sort of a kind of material culture, right? That represents each individual kind of place in the diaspora necessarily.
Yeah, I think our institutions, we're still, as I said, we don't have a single thing in our archives just yet. But I think we'll end up being very similar in that sense that you have artwork. We've worked with the Holocaust Museum actually in Glendale. We were very fortunate to work with you and have some of your artifacts on loan and artwork. So you have a lot of materials, but also you have a lot of artworks, right? You have collections by Holocaust survivors. Um, so I think we will be similar because it is finally we're a cultural center, and so
Right.
we already have, even though we're not open yet, we have a lot of people coming forward and wanting to donate things from documents and from cultural artifacts, rugs, and books. A lot of books that people are offering to us, also artworks. Right. So it's going to be the sort of I think, if I could envision the future, our collection is going to be kind of very broad. And actually, one thing that we don't need, that's one of the questions that Michael was, we don't need books because there's a library, literally, there's going to be a library 100 feet from the entrance of our museum. So one of the things that we're going to try to resist to collect is books. But also that's a difficult issue, right? With community-based organizations, institutions like yours and ours, we have a kind of a responsibility to keep the community, the culture of the community through the materials in our institution in a way, right? But also, we don't want to collect things that we may not ever display or not ever use, or we may think is not very relevant historically or culturally. So there's a fine line to walk there, right?
Yeah. I mean, especially given that line is meant to also encompass something that is quite, in indescribably large, right? Like it's an entire community, but that doesn't just mean the community as it exists right now, but also looking at a community as it has changed over time and sort of developed and redeveloped itself over various iterations of geopolitical landscapes. There's so much to be said of what it means to collect those materials that represent it, but also to think about how you sort of shift with the communities shifts as you encounter them, I guess.
Yeah, and we, as I was saying, I think earlier, we had meetings with many different institutions about how do we start a collection. So one of the things is that we wanted to see if we could do it right from the first step, right? And we also and what was kind of surprising to me that even very well established institutions had issues with their collections at some point in their history. I think yours also had things that you wanted to fix, you wanted to reconsider your collection, right? It seems
Yeah.
like,
Well, it's
yeah, go ahead.
interesting because it makes me think a little bit about things that have actually stayed quite consistent, which I've been finding. I've been part of a project that we've been recording institutional oral histories within the museum, and some of the things that have come up that have been really incredibly inspiring in some ways is the ways that the kind of collecting mission and the educational mission have stayed quite consistent since since the 70s or 80s, and that traces back um, to that value of survivor voice, this idea that we were not a museum that was going to focus solely on the evidentiary record or the artifact that was created by an official department, but really thinking about this validation of survivor memory as it pairs to the artifact. And that's something that we've seen. I think I actually sent Michael a photo of one of the founders of the museum, if he could throw it on the screen maybe, but standing with the screen of his testimony. So our first paid museum director, Michael Nukevich, um, when we first moved to the ground floor of the original space in the Jewish Federation building, started recording these early testimonies with survivors who, which was going to become essentially the guiding kind of artifact of this ground floor first exhibition space. So this is Joseph Freeman standing in front of his testimony, which is something that has been really kind of amazing as oral history continues to play such an important role in our collection. Whereas other things that I think were maybe collected more readily at a certain point we've definitely reached a limit of those kinds of artifacts. For instance, we try to preserve as much space as possible for these histories, for these survivor materials, and that means that the wealth of donation inquiries that we get about Nazi materials, for instance, we can't really accept those, nor are we interested in accepting all of them or collecting them on a large scale. This does pose other kinds of questions for us to sort of deal with internally and think about, if we don't accept them, where do they go? What happens to these materials? But it also, and we do obviously think that understanding perpetrator history is important, but these are the kinds of materials that we have to be incredibly selective with so that we can preserve the space for materials that are community created or relevant to community history.
Yeah, so you have some experience in terms of how to be selective in that, right? Over time, you figured out you need to be selective in some way. And yeah, and I'm like, that's going to be a big challenge for us, I think, to how do we become, what is the scope? I guess that's the other big question. What is the scope of the collections? What do you accept? What do we don't accept? And so these are things that we're trying to work through. If there's something that may have a very high personal value, but not so much historical or cultural value, but it's also by a very important member of the community, for instance, right? So you have to kind of honor those relationships. So what do you do in that case? What do you do? Do you take it? You don't take it? You to draw the hard line, but you really, if you are a community institution, which we are, it's very difficult to find that line. I'm
Yeah,
sure you
absolutely,
guys do. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, especially when you're if someone is donating it from the community, there's this understanding that it's important to someone in the community. And I think that kind of
Right.
acknowledgement of the diversity of people who share, uh, certain commonalities or certain backgrounds, but have incredibly different experiences of how they relate to that part of their culture. As you were saying, these 100% of an identity that also blanket one another into creating the whole person. I really relate to this and think about it a lot
Mhm.
in the context of my own experience with thinking about how my grandmother collects her materials, but also thinking about how historical significance plays a role in all of her materials in some ways, right? Like, I sometimes walk into her apartment and think of the entire thing as a Holocaust archive, right? And
Yeah.
then there's also
Which it
something,
which it is. Which it
right,
is in a
right.
way,
And
right?
it
Which it
is.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are the things that I find kind of fascinating about archiving and personal archiving specifically, but also thinking about something that I find really important in thinking about collection is this sort of renegotiation with the present, right? So like over time, her perception, and I speak about my grandmother's perception of her experiences has changed. Things that she's remembered have shifted, or these are natural kind of things that happen to us as humans. And I think there's just as much importance to these things that have become more important to her later in life, um, and the continuation of her life, the continuation of survival that didn't stop it in 1945, and kind of understanding how all of those things fit into this evolving approach to how we teach about an event that happened in sort of a vacuum amount of time, right? Like the after effects and these things that are malleable in different ways, and kind of go in and out of valued
Mhm.
perception, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And for instance, a lot of the material that she may have could be considered survivor objects, right?
Right. Yeah. Or
Objects that
material
have
culture. Yeah.
material culture that that um, you know I feel like objects are also witnesses, documents. The earth is also a witness to what happens upon it. And survivor objects have experience, and in many ways, they go through the same kind of experience that the communities go through, being driven out, being displaced, being torn apart from their owners. Um, so objects that become part of this archives are also, I don't know, to have a certain agency, as I was saying earlier. I
Definitely.
think it's
Yeah.
really
Well, I think
important to
it's
consider that.
also it's there's a distinction between what also is important to her, what's important to me, and then what's
Mhm.
important to someone who's, what's important, I guess I shouldn't
Or
even
the
say to
institution,
the
to the
person, to an
institution.
education, right? Like to an
Right,
institutional educational sort of
right,
perspective, so that we can actually teach, and teaching requires in many ways linearity, right? And that's
right.
really counterintuitive to how memory works or how life works, so
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
there are things that I wonder, I mean, maybe you can speak a little bit, I don't know if this is something that you've encountered also, as someone with personal ties to displacement, but and to the genocide, are there things that you've encountered that you think are really important, that you've received any sort of pushback from other people in the community for, or
In terms of thinking is important or valuable to collect, and
right, right,
um, no, I'm not sure. As I said, we haven't.
right.
Everything is kind of ephemeral for us right now. Just lists of things that people have wanting to donate to us. Um, But the discussion is always there. At some point, we're going to have to write the scope of what we're going to accept, what we're not going to accept. We can't accept everything because it's all you need resources to keep it well, to place it someplace. You need to catalog it. You need the archivist has to spend time on it. So it's every little thing that you collect is requires resources from you.
Right. Yeah.
And we certainly we have very limited resources, our institution, and so that's always going to be a consideration of what we take and what we don't take. So that's something that I'm thinking a lot about right now: community value versus personal value versus historical value.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
And
is
I actually I wanted to ask you. So, I mean, a lot of your collection is more personal belongings, you said, right? But do you have issues with like dealing with provenance in terms of somebody donates something that's some artwork or something like that? Do you do you place a lot of emphasis on provenance? Like someplace like the Getty, for instance, if they don't have the very clear documented provenance of an artifact, they will not touch it with a 10-foot pole, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly don't have the kinds of the Getty is a much more privileged institution than we are, I will say. We don't have, so there's a little bit of a different you know
Right.
uh
Yeah.
uh decision-making process, but we do take provenance really seriously. So say ultimately, yes, if the provenance seems fishy, there's serious conversations that are going to be had before anything like that would ever enter, if at all, the collection. I think a more common situation is provenance as it pertains to like original owners, maybe in some ways. I shouldn't say common because actually this is
Mm.
really only pertinent to the one collection that I'm working on. But you know, we know exactly who had the collection, we know exactly where it came from, but obviously how it ended up in those auction houses. And this is a collection of 1,200 historical records, and that's something that each individual item did come from somewhere else. And so figuring out, and the work is really to figure out that provenance to the best of our ability, to understand how we can trace it, um, and kind of figure out its legitimacy. And
Right. This collection, that's documents from from
yeah,
the Reichs, the different
yeah,
places. So a lot of them are documented in terms of where they came from.
yes,
Is that right?
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But yes, I mean, everything that I- personal, I think we receive mostly family donations, and so those we do know where they're coming from. Yeah.
Right. I suspect we're going to be the same. Yeah.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you both so much. And I would love to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A box. And one question we have is about the locations of both museums. So, Holocaust Museum LA is in Pan Pacific Park, and the Muir Museum will be in Glendale. Um, I mean, what was the process like of choosing a location in within Los Angeles to create your to build your institutions?
For Ara,
Go
or
ahead. There's go ahead.
I can
Yeah.
say really
Oh,
quickly that for us, we were in, as I said, we were the museum was located within the Jewish Federation, and then which moved when we moved locations a few times, we ended up in Pan Pacific Park. I there's for various reasons, but I guess the location choosing process, I think we knew that we always wanted to be in a public facing space. And it was also because this was the location of the Martyrs Memorial that had been erected. So we wanted to create a space where, after having the Yom HaShoah yearly memorials in this park, this was a large community space for quite some time. This was the desired location to build a permanent home for the collection and continue both gathering around this memorial, but also having a place to bring students.
Yeah, so I wasn't directly involved in originally how the museum location was decided, but I know that we needed the community needed a partner, like a civic partner, to be able to build this museum because it was going to be really out of our reach to not only buy land but also build on it. It was just going to be really impossible to do that in an urban setting. So the city of Glendale, and as you many of you may know, a lot of Armenians, big Armenian community, big Armenian presence in the city of Glendale. And so the relationships over the last few decades, a number of Armenian city council people, Armenian heritage. And so the museum is working very closely with the city of Glendale. The land is actually lent by the city of Glendale, where the museum is. I believe for like I don't know $1 for 99 years or some kind of one of those deals where it's basically donated by the city with certain conditions. For instance, like there's what used to be at that location at the corner of Brand and Colorado, or very close by, was a park. And so the museum replaces the park. But what's going to happen, and this is one of the conditions by the city placed on the museum, is that uh, more park space needs to be created. And for that to happen, right now between the Glendale Central Library and the museum, there's a parking lot, and there's lots of different parking right around the museum, but right around the library, in between the two structures. So those parking structures, those parking spaces will turn into a public park, and the museum was mandated to create parking on the ground. So there's going to be parking on the ground. So to replace the parking, that then is going to become green space. I mean, it's going to be like a public park, very much like Pan Pacific Park in the way, your museum is amazing because you're walking up, you're like in this park, and then suddenly you run into this tremendous museum. It's kind of partially underground. It's a really tremendous kind of structure. And ours is going to be, you'll be able to walk out of the library, go straight into the museum, and then the museum on neon art is also nearby. And so this whole space is going to be this kind of park with public art, and it'll be like a central place, right close to the Americana. Kind of, we tend to build not we don't tend to build too many parks, right? We tend to build commercial spaces, and so I'm also very, very happy that this is happening in terms of for the city of Glendale, where people can have public space where they can spend time with nobody trying to sell them something.
Thank you. And I know we mentioned a little bit about oral history at Holocaust Museum LA. And so what role will that play in your museum?
Oh, I think it's going to play a very, very important role. There's no official history, right? Evidence that you may present about different things, specifically, for instance, for the genocide. In the genocide section, there was a kind of discussion that we had that do you present evidence, or do you present things that are more sort of human story, the stories that were on the ground, experiences of individuals. So I think there's going to be definitely leaning towards presenting those kinds of stories. So oral history is going to be an important part, not only in that section of the museum, but also in the American Armenian history section, as well as future sections. I think it's going to be kind of based on people musing and thinking and imagining about what a future may be. And that's one of the other things about archives, right? I think your museum has a large collection of oral histories that becomes part of the archive. And we hope that ours will also have that. I mean, obviously we can't create new, for instance, genocide related oral history archives, but there are some efforts now to create archives, oral histories of post-genocide, second and third generation experiences, diasporic experiences.
Yeah, or maybe just, I mean, or life histories of individuals in the community, I think are just as, relevant to what the museum is really aiming to represent over time, a reflection of the community itself. So I think that it
Yes.
now would be a great time to begin,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now is always the best time to begin.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And a question for Harris. What is the oldest artifact at Holocaust Museum LA?
This is a question so well suited for our collections manager, which I am not. Um, um, I think it's our Torah scroll. I'm not sure though off the top of my head, and I'm so embarrassed to say that. It's just something I know it and it's in the back of my mind, and I'd be happy to send an email to whoever asked this question with the exact answer. I'm very deep in my
Okay. Well, not a problem. Thank
my
you. Well, thank you so
oh,
much.
it's
And
I'm sorry, I've just actually it's the Bomberg Talmud. Yes.
thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank both of you so much for taking part in this discussion. This has been very informative and so special to have the opportunity to see a preview of your upcoming museum that I know our community looks forward to visiting in 2 years. And of course, as Harris mentioned, our museum is currently expanding, and this is why one of the reasons we're doing a lot of online programs so everyone can follow our website to see what we have coming up. And we look forward to reopening in June of 2026. And we also look so forward to partnering with you in the future and with your museum because, as we've learned today, our museums will have a lot of similarities and similar missions and really a similar goal to teach history to the community. And this is this is such an important job that you both have in orchestrating the collections and the exhibition aspect of how we can really curate this history and teach the stories of these cultures. So I want to thank you both very much for speaking today with us, and of course, thank you for tuning in today, and wishing everyone a good rest of the week. And again, just we're
Thank
grateful
you.
for the work that you do.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Michael.
much. Thank you,
Thank
Ara,
you. Thank you, Harris. It's a pleasure.
for me as well. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Michael.